I have an album that debuted number 1 on iTunes, but I haven't been on like TV yet. So
that's awesome though. An album that debuted
number
1.
It was dope. It was dope. So I was able to, but they let me headline because they're like, hey, this guy's been putting in the work. He's headlining other stuff around town, and he's headlining the road. So when that happened, I was able to call upon the base I've created in Chicago, but just also across, and be like, let's sell the show out.
Yeah.
And we sold the show out 2 weeks before the show.
Wow.
Which is like for stand up, like normally people buy it like close in. So it felt very good to be like, okay, looking back on the 7-year career and the people I've built, like the social media following and all these things, these are like people who are engaged fans. Like,
yeah,
it's not like, maybe you don't have 100,000 followers on Instagram, but I have like almost 4, and they're loyal.
Loyal,
4.
They're going to show up to every show, support you.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like, it made me feel like very validated, because I'm like, sometimes in comedy, you're so in it day to day, show over show, you have to zoom out and be like, oh, I have people who've been with me on this journey as well, and you got to remember that, because it is a very, like, it's all about ourselves and like pushing forward, but think about the support system you have, think about the people in your life, and if you can leverage that and think about that while you're on this journey, like, you're going to have such a better...
What up, everybody? Welcome to Adversity Kings, another episode of Adversity Kings. Next to me, I got my man Vik
Pandya.
Yep. Right? Okay, nice to meet you, man. Nice to meet you. So, just to jump right into it, start a little bit about kind of your past, give people an overview of, kind of how you grew up, where you started, where you're from, what led you to where you're at today. So if you want to kind of jump into that a little bit, and then we can elaborate from there.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks for having me on, man. So I'm a stand-up comedian based in Chicago. I grew up outside the city in the suburbs, went to school at DePaul in the city, and started doing stand-up about a year after college. So I've been doing stand-up for about 7 years now. Like I said, based in Chicago, but I tour nationally. I trained as an improviser at Second City, and then that kind of like led me into hitting stand-up quite a bit. So I have like an improv background, but really heavy into stand-up, and I'm touring. I put out a couple albums. I run my own shows. At this point now, I've become a headliner in the last year or so. So I'm now the bill. So like it's cool to be like the people coming to see me, which is a different feeling in the last year. So now I'm trying to move tickets. That's the whole game now.
Let's go. So you're leveling up, obviously. What just to start from the beginning, what really like got you into stand up? You know what I mean? That's what I wonder, is like what brings people to say, I'm going to go all in on this, because obviously you're all in. That's 100%. You live, eat, breathe it. Mm-hmm. What got you into stand up originally? Yeah,
I mean, for me, I grew up watching like Mad TV, SNL, The Daily Show, just these comedy centered shows, and that always what resonated with me the most. What I was most interested in was it movies, whether that genre just always appealed to me. But I never knew you could do stand-up as like a job. Like I didn't think, I was like, because you would see like George Carlin, and you're like, that's like a different level. You're seeing stand-up at the highest level. And then you realize as you get older and you go to Second City, you're like, oh, there's classes about comedy. There's classes around improv. And it starts to kind of demystify that whole like what it looks like on the inside. So that's what led me to my first open mic. And then I was like, oh, now I'm seeing the lowest level. Like you're seeing Carlin, all these big people like Chris Rock, and then you go to an open mic, you're like, oh, I could do this.
Yeah.
And then you go on stage and you're like, oh, this is way harder than I thought and than it looks. And then you kind of eat shit for a year and kind of find your voice. And, it's still constantly, like we were talking about before the podcast, constantly a humbling experience, because you never really, you think where you are in your comedy mindset, your ethos, but that also evolves as you change as a person. So, but the one thing I know is like when you do it and it's like it connects, you're like, oh, I'm meant to be doing this. There's something about this that I should go all in, because it's like it feels the best. I'm connecting with people. People are telling me like I've had people come to me like, you're gonna be somebody someday. Yeah. Like that shit helps. It means a lot. So it all started though like just off these just interest in comedy at a young age.
Yes, sir. Do you have a idol at all, like a mentor idol that you kind of like look up to, that you trying to you kind of try to copy their level?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite comedian of all time, he actually passed away, but Patrice O'Neal, and he was like a regular on the Opie and Anthony show. This big, just hilarious black dude who was like said whatever the fuck he wanted, was extremely honest at all times, to the point at a detriment of his career because
Yeah.
he would just burn bridges. He'd just tell people how he really felt. He wouldn't do anything that he felt was corny.
No filter.
Yeah, inauthentic. And people literally have been reposting his clips in the last couple of years with all these like, social movements and like COVID and stuff. And they're like, what would Patrice say about this? Because like, it's like, like Carlin bits get circulated on Twitter all the time whenever an issue comes up because like these profound people have been we want to hear what they think because they kind of break it down and expose the hypocrisy and all these things. So yeah, he was just one of these guys, naturally funny all the time. And we call it like in the business being on,
Right.
And someone like that who's on just all the time, but being themselves.
Yeah.
Like that's what you strive for as a comedian, to be yourself and not have to like change and put out what you find funny, and then your audience comes to you. So he was like biggest inspiration of all time, kind of what I strive to do. Definitely, some of the things that he did were I wouldn't do, it's like some mistakes. So you can learn from both, right? The things he did right and the things he did wrong. So
right.
I think though overall, if I had to pick one person, it would be him.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and that's the thing. I think that's where your power comes from. You know what I mean? Is just being yourself, not worrying about what other people think. And that's like obviously comedy takes a lot of confidence to be like, and it's rare. Like to find a man with confidence nowadays is kind of rare. You know what I mean? So everybody's offended by everything. Yep. So in the world of comedy, it's awesome to kind of be able to get on there and be yourself, and that's what really gives you the power. That's what really makes you funny. And I feel like naturally with the way the universe works, if you're interested in appealing in comedy growing up in general, you're probably a funny person already, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so,
I think you have to have some, people talk about all the time, like, can you learn funny? There's this big debate, like, people, teach improv because there's like patterns and there's skills and there's comfort on stage. But for stand-up, there's like people are very conflicted on if you should teach stand-up because some people are like, no, you have to go figure it out yourself. You got to get on stage, figure out what works. There's no, like, yes, you can teach someone how to write a joke, but how they deliver the joke, how they present it, the physicality, like that's all on you. That's all personal. And what works for you may not work for me. So why should you be teaching this? And so there's different schools of thoughts around it. I definitely think there is some inert ability. There's some natural ability you have, but like anything, it can be honed. It could be,
yes,
it
sir.
can be refined. So why not do everything you can to make it better? So for me, that means, I took the improv classes to get more comfortable on stage, but I also took acting classes, because I'd done some acting, but I think all that helps my stand-up because like I've just taken little bits from everything, and then also from other comedians you learn stuff, just doing it long enough. So I don't think there's like a one-size-fits-all thing, but I think overall you just gotta have to find what works for you and just like consistently. It's all about consistency, just hit it. Like I do stand-up pretty much every day, and if I'm not on stage, I'm doing comedy-related things every day.
Yeah, so you're committed. You're 100% committed, and that's the biggest thing. Like for us in sales, it's a numbers game. Like we can go out and know how many calls you make, and if you read this script that you're going to get XYZ results. But that's the thing with comedy. There's no, from what I see, there's no foundational like this step by step. So it's really failure to success. Like you're failing until you get to success. And what about for you? So at what point in your career did your career start to take off? Because obviously you said you're leveling up. Now people are paying. They're coming to see you. Now it's just growing your audience from this point on, and eventually going to the Madison Square Garden and beyond that. So where did in your career did it start to turn for you? That it started to level up?
Honestly, I got lucky just early on because I think people can tell if you're like serious about it. Now being in this game 7 years, looking at newer comedians coming up and seeing, you can tell kind of quickly if someone either has it or, what we call like in the business it, or just if they have a good work ethic, And I think for me, I treated it like a job day one. A lot of people like in the stand-up world, like I came from a 9-to-5 corporate background, so I had that kind of discipline already. So when I hit stand-up, I treated it like a job. Like I was like, I'm going to hit 2 to 3 open mics a week. I'm going to write material every day. I'm going to practice. I'm going to refine it. And so when I went to a mic, I came in with like intention. I came in with stuff to do. And I think people around the scene kind of noticed that because they're like, oh, he's coming here to work. Like even though he's not good yet and he's not
committed.
Funny, he's committed and he shows up every week. He'll bomb every week, but he'll get a little better every time. And he's trying new stuff. He's finding his voice, and he's not scared to like do this because it's. Like I said, it's incredibly hard the first year, even 2 years, just like, there's so many bad shows. The amount of good shows and good mics you do, it's like the number kind of slides. The scale changes as you go more and more in your career. But I still have bad shows. You still have weird sets, all the time. But when you're new, it's like that's almost exclusively what you have, because you're not there. No one's booking you on the Laugh Factory or the Zanies stage, because they don't know who you are. So I think that was one thing I started learning is like a year in, I started just taking it really seriously. I started running my own shows, and then that kind of put me on the map. So even like a year in, people are like, oh, like this guy, we don't know not everyone knows who I am, but they're like, we heard about this killer show this guy's running. So me and a couple of friends, we took all the skills we developed in the business corporate world, started producing shows after going to stand-up shows for 6 months and seeing where the gaps were and being like, oh, we can do this a little bit better. And even though we're not the funniest people, we have this production mindset. So it kind of put us on the map early on, at least in Chicago, because people are like, what's this show? Because and at this point, we're just trying to get known within the comedy scene. So for other comedians to know who we were, that also helps your career, because then you start getting opportunities. You start getting booked on stuff. So it all was kind of like serving. For us, we just did it to get stage time, because no one was booking us, because no one knew who we were. So it was all this weird thing. It's like with a job, your first job. They're like, what do you need to get your first job? You need experience. But you're like, but I don't have experience.
Exactly.
I don't have a first job. It's like this conundrum, right? It's the same thing with stand-up. They're like, well, to get on our show, you have to have a proven track record of doing these other shows, or at least have a funny clip. And you're like, well, I don't have a funny clip because I haven't been booked on any shows. so it's like this, it's ongoing thing. So we had to create our own space. And then I got lucky because I think it was 9 months into stand-up. I'd been going to this open mic pretty regularly in the city. It was like a small one. And I was one of the loyal once-a-week people. And one of the people who was at the mic was he was an agent, a college agent, and he knew Roy Wood Jr., who was on The Daily Show at the time. And Roy Wood Jr. was preparing to tape his first Comedy Central hour. So he calls me up one day, and he goes, hey, I have an opportunity for you. We're basically running a secret show, pop-up show at our venue for this big name. I can't tell you who it is, but he's big. Do you want to open for 7 to 8 minutes?
Wow.
And he's like, we like your energy. You're confident, and I think you'd be a good fit for this. And he's like, we're going to have it professionally recorded. And this was before, this is, 6 years ago. So obviously people were videotaping stuff, but it wasn't to the level it is now. So people weren't just tripods at shows, and it wasn't that world yet. So getting a good clip was kind of everything. So I was like, yeah, absolutely. And then the day off, he tells me it's Roy Wood Jr.
Wow.
And I'm a huge fan of The Daily Show. Like I said, grew up on this stuff, watching Jon Stewart and things like that. And I was like, oh, this is huge. So I go in and, I'm wearing a suit, come in correct, just come in, kill this set, hottest set of my life, because it's a packed room. They're all comedy fans. They set it up so well. So I have this incredible 7-minute set, get it professionally recorded, HD and audio. So then I take that clip, and then I obviously submit to a bunch of shows around town, and I get in, because now I'm I've opened for Roy Wood Jr., which is a huge credit a year into stand-up. And then I also got into all these comedy festivals. So comedy festivals are these cities will put up these festivals, and some of them are more prestigious than others, but basically it's just a way to network and tour and do this, especially early on in your career, it's important. So I wasn't getting these, I was getting 5-8 minute sets in the city, but then at the comedy festival they give you 10, 12 minutes, maybe 15 minutes, because they're like, oh, you're from Chicago, you over for Roy Wood Jr., you must be somebody.
Yeah.
And in Chicago we have a huge comedy scene, so there's way more comedians. And so even if you're a headliner, if I headline a local show, I might be doing 15 and 20 minutes. If you headline on the road, you're doing 45 minutes. So it's a different kind of scale just because of the number of good comedians here. So I was put in these situations around the country where now I'm doing 10, 12 minutes. I've only have 8 minutes. I did the 8 minutes that you saw. So now I'm forced to level up again, because I'm I have to write new material. I have to keep refining my skills and kind of rise to the occasion. And so I've done now 17 comedy festivals, I think, which is a lot, and I did most of those within year 1 to 3 of my career. So it's almost that was kind of the inverse of what people would typically think. But that helped me so much because I got my name out there kind of early on. So I really, after that first year, I feel I've been kind of steadily just doing shows. It's only built from there. But after that first year, I really felt I was okay, I'm somebody. But now it's being a headliner in the last year, it's okay, now I can feel I've arrived, at least in Chicago. And it's cool to meet people. I get recognized once in a while on the street, oh, I follow you on Instagram. I've seen a reel of yours, or I saw you at the Laugh Factory. It's starting to feel like something now.
You're
really
getting
excited.
known.
Yeah.
Well, that's crazy you mentioned that, because based on what I'm hearing from you, you haven't even brought up the money at all. So what it sounds like to me is you were focused on the long-term vision. You knew kind of where you wanted to be long-term, and you were just like you said, in the process, just submerged in the process, trying to get your name out there because you knew what it really took. You know what I mean? For me though, I wanted to ask you, were you making money in those 9 months to a year, or how was that working?
Absolutely not. So stand-up is, if you're trying to make money, stand-up is not the career choice for you. So like I said, I came from this corporate background. I had a good job, and I maintained a good corporate job up until about a year ago. So even through all this career progression,
you still worked at
still was working full time.
Wow.
I mean, pandemic kind of changed things a little bit. I went part time and kind of virtual, which is much better.
Helped
a lot, especially with the travel. But for 5 years or so, I was doing a full time in the office gig while doing stand up pretty much every day. I mean, it was now looking back on it, I'm like, I don't know how I physically did
balanced that.
Yeah. Also, like had a relationship. I was working out pretty much every day. Like I had a schedule, I was really
disciplined. Yes,
disciplined.
Sir.
Yeah. It's all about that discipline. But I was able to kind of do things that, like these festivals, like I described, if you're a year into stand up and you're not making any money, you're making like $20 a show, 30, like really bad. It's not enough it's not enough to sustain that. But I could say yes to this festival in, Iowa. That's a good festival, but you have to travel there. But because I had the job money, so
smart,
I was able to kind of leverage. And I knew at that point, I'm like, this is an investment in my career.
Yeah.
So I'm taking the money from this other thing, putting it into here because I know in 3 years this will pay off. And that's exactly what happened. Like now I'm making money off stand up. It's gotten better. It's still not incredible because there's still like, I'm a headliner. People think you're like, oh, and every comedian under me is like, I wish I was that. I'm like, you still can't. You have to do all these other things. You got to do corporate shows. You got to do private shows, which pay a lot more. Like club shows don't pay what, the disparity is crazy. So I'm also doing a lot of that other stuff, which also has increased over time. But it took like a lot of that initial investment, just faith of like, this is going to lead somewhere. And like I said, I just had the security. And that's why I never quit the job, even though I was like, I don't want to do this, not my passion. But if I can find a way to make this work. And a lot of people who do stand-up work like part-time hourly jobs, which actually is kind of tougher sometimes because you're like, if you're a server, you're serving at night at a restaurant, you can't go out and do shows or mics at night because you're like, it conflicts. With a 9-to-5 job, I'm home by like 5:36. I have like a couple hours to kind of get ready, prepare. Then I'm out at night from like 8 to midnight. But it's like, it's a grind, but it's like, at least there's that separation. And so I realized that kind of early on. I'm like, I can maintain the separation, still progress, still kind of lead some semblance of a life, even though it's insane. I was able to kind of manage all that at the same time.
Yeah, that's the discipline of a routine and schedule. Yeah. That's what, I try to talk. Most people don't, plan to fail. They fail to plan, right? Yep. So what about for you, though? Obviously not making money for a year besides, you had your corporate job. Now, are you officially done with your corporate job? You said about a year ago?
Yeah, about a year ago. And I was kind of like doing some part-time work, consulting and doing some other stuff, which actually was good money. But in the last few weeks, that's kind of wrapped up. So now I'm really just focused on, like I said, I've just been touring a lot, just hitting stand-up. Also, kind of like I might be teaching stand-up at Second City. That's like a thing that might happen pretty soon here. So doing some more like, I would say short-term kind of project stuff because I'd rather now, the idea of being tied down permanently now is not appealing to me.
Right.
Like stand-up is it. So these are all I would consider side kind of endeavors, but it's nice to be able to position to be like, okay, I'll teach a class for 6 months or 6 weeks rather. And then if I don't like it, I don't want to continue that. I don't need to, but at least I can say I did it, And I do think part of this is like, I think it's important to give back. Like 90% of the opportunities I've gotten in stand-up are because people are like, they've taken me on the road with them or they've referred me or something. Giving you a chance. And there's no job board for stand-up. There's no Indeed.com. Like it's all referral based,
Right.
So it's like, it's all referral based, all submission based. So, I mean, you have to kind of make a name for yourself, but also maintain these relationships. So there's so much behind the scenes work that I'm doing. Like today, I'm not going to be on stage today, but I'm sending out booking emails. I'm promoting myself on social media. Doing the dirty work.
I was going to ask you that.
All that shit, all the admin stuff. And a lot of people have one or the other. They're great on stage, but then they don't market themselves. And then they're like, you see them live, you're like, how are you not more booked? And you're like, oh, I suck at social media, or like I can't, I don't submit to things. It's like, well, you got to put yourself out there too. So there's so many comedians. Everyone thinks like, I'm funny enough, they'll find me. Yes, but you also have to ask.
Yeah.
It doesn't hurt to ask, And that's with like life in general. I mean, if you don't put yourself out there and ask and push, like no one's going to give you shit.
No one's going to give you anything. You got to take it. You got to go get it. Yep, exactly. Wow. Well, if you can touch on like what like obviously you had a vision, and obviously you're in that process, you're gaining some momentum. What do you dream about? Like, what your end goal? You know, what do you dream about at the end for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's also kind of evolved a little bit because now the industry is changing in stand-up. Like, when I started, the whole goal was to get, like, a late-night spot. Like, get on Conan, get on Seth Meyers, get on Jimmy Kimmel. And if you get that late-night spot, you do your 5-minute set on there, then you suddenly, your career is now in this next phase and you're headlining clubs every weekend. But that actually was on the decline even then, and now it's almost like that doesn't even matter.
Yeah.
So now you create your own name. You either put out a YouTube special, you rise through Instagram clips or
Social
TikTok
media.
clips, social media. So, which is empowering for the comedians because we are getting discovered on our own content, and people are now coming to us for be like, oh, we'd love to put you on this show, we'd love to put you in this web series, whatever it is. But you have to then create that audience and cultivate it yourself. But if you do that and you put the groundwork in, you have loyal fans who will come to stuff. I mean, when I headlined Zanies last year, it was a comedy club in Chicago. It's like one of the oldest clubs in the country. It's 45 years old. It's like top 3 oldest in the country. It's like this really prestigious club. And I worked there a ton, but I hadn't headlined it yet, which is like normally to headline a club, you have to have like a TV credit. Or you have to have something. I have an album that debuted #1 on iTunes, but I haven't been on like TV yet. So
that's awesome though. An album that debuted #1.
It was dope. It was dope. So I was able to, but they let me headline because they're like, hey, this guy's been putting in the work. He's headlining other stuff around town, and he's headlining the road. So when that happened, I was able to call upon the base I've created in Chicago, but just also across, and be like, let's sell the show out.
Yeah.
And we sold the show out 2 weeks before the show.
Wow.
Which is like for stand up, like normally people buy like close in. So it felt very good to be like, okay, looking back on the 7-year career and the people I've built, like the social media following and all these things, these are like people who are engaged fans. Like, it's not like, maybe you don't have 100,000 followers on Instagram, but I have like almost 4, and they're loyal. Loyal 4.
They're going to show up to every show, support you.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like, it made me feel like very validated because I'm like, sometimes in comedy, you're so in it day to day, show over show. You have to zoom out and be like, oh, you know, I have people who've been with me on this journey as well. And you got to remember that because it is a very, like, it's all about ourselves and like pushing forward. But think about the support system you have. Think about the people in your life. And if you can leverage that and think about that while you're on this journey, like, you're going to have such a better career. And also just, you don't feel as alone, you know?
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, that's what my mentors always told me. Like, you can leverage 2 things in this life: people and money, right? And then the next thing is obviously, you know, just for you, you're putting in the work. That's the opportunity. So people ask like, oh, how do you get so lucky? You know, when hard work meets opportunity, that's when luck's created, right? So I think for you, from you putting in the dirty work, you know what I mean? Nobody wants to sit here and send out emails. Nobody wants to sit here and do all that. You know what I mean? Now, most people in that point of journey would quit. You from just listening to you had an amazing work ethic so far. Like, you've never made an excuse. You never sat there and said, maybe I'll just da-da-da. You know what I mean? You never made the excuse. You were just willing to do whatever it takes because that's how bad you wanted that. You know what I mean? So I think a lot of people, and you could touch on this a little bit as well, is like a lot of people growing up, they have these dreams as a kid. You know what I mean? Yep. Like you said, your passion, comedy, it appealed to you, and you're able to pursue that. You kept that in front of you your whole life, and you're willing to do whatever it takes. You stay with it. What do you think separates people that they have this dream as a kid, astronaut, president, whatever the case may be, and they just get away from that and they settle for something that's, settle for an average, miserable life almost?
Yeah. I think most people are scared, I think it's very hard to, it's also like, it's so many things, like environmentally, right? We're taught like you want to get a good job, raise a family, like sustain yourself. Like, these are all important things, of course, but you're not necessarily taught to like pursue your passion, because your passion may not equate monetarily, as we just talked about,
yes,
right?
Sir.
So you're kind of like, the way I was brought up is like, get yourself figured out, get your situation figured out, then you can kind of do whatever you want. But make sure you can take care of yourself, which I think is important. And I think I'm glad that was instilled in me, because I was able to kind of do this comedy thing almost as like, I didn't really tell my parents necessarily how aggressively I was pursuing it that first couple of years, but they knew I had this good job, and so they didn't really care. I would tell them about comedy. I wouldn't lie about it, but I wouldn't be like, I'm actually like on stage every day. Like that to them, that would be crazy if I was like, I'm doing this job, and like they wouldn't understand that. But now they're seeing what that 7 years of work has led to. And now I'm able to be like, now they're like, oh no, he's out every day, every weekend. Now they kind of understand. But so sometimes you have to kind of like just understand that it is scary. It is like this leap of faith. But if you don't take it, you're going to always regret it.
You know,
the regret is worse. I mean, so many people are miserable in their jobs. So many people hate it. I think it's also important to try a lot of shit. I mean, a lot of people are like, oh, I don't know what I want to do. It's like, well, try a few things that you're maybe, I have an inkling to look back to your childhood, like you were saying, like, what were these dreams? Because so many times we're so far away from our dream, we forget what our dream even was. So you have to kind of do things to, you know, I'm reading this book, it's called The Artist's Way, and it's like it's like a very like kind of like spiritual guide to creative work and stuff. And some of it is a little bit too flowery for me, but I do like some of the principles they talk about. And one of the things they talk about is going to these things called artist dates. So taking yourself on almost a date. So no one else, no one, just no distractions, going and doing something that's not related to your job. Okay. And not necessarily related to your passion either. Just something like go to a museum and
to
just
get to know yourself.
Get to know yourself, be alone with your thoughts, and really find out who you are. Because think about that. Like, how rare is it, unless you're like doing a job or doing something that's like related to something that you're interested in, are you just in the world by yourself and really truly alone? And a lot of people are terrified by that because they're like, I don't want to face the thoughts I have, or I want the distractions, right? So it is important to do stuff like that. And again, it's hard to do because it's hard to be like, I have these responsibilities, I have to step away. But making that time for yourself will let you figure out what these dreams are, what you're trying to do, because you'll realize like, oh, I forgot, like I was really into that, or like I haven't done any self-discovery. Yeah. And I mean, I came from, in addition to this 9-to-5 background, like I came up in like cross country running and track in high school, and that really gave me the discipline of like doing something like every day. Yeah. And kind of painful, but also important to like break down those walls a little bit. And most people, like when I started stand up, I was able to apply that discipline to that. Yeah. Even though that was a very physical endeavor, this is now a mental endeavor, and that mental strength from the physical endeavor that you gain was huge. And I think it's almost like pushing yourself a little bit, because if you don't push yourself at all, you're never going to find out what you're capable of.
Exactly. You're never going to find your limits. Yes, sir.
And most people are just comfortable. Like, it's easy to be comfortable. That's an easy choice, but it's also the boring choice. Like, what if you push yourself, you find out you're like, oh, I'm into that, or I didn't know I was good at this. You could find out shit about yourself you don't know, because we all think we have this image of who we are. And when we're actually in the moment, like I remember the first time I went on stage, I was like, oh, I think I'm pretty funny. I know what I know who I am. I know what I think is funny. I go on stage, and it completely changed my perception of that. I'm like, first of all, I'm not funny. Yeah. I am funny, but not to these people right now. And also, what I thought my perception, how I came across is not how I'm being received. Right. So it was really interesting to be like, oh, I thought I knew who I was. And it's still sometimes, like now I'm getting to a point where I finally, after 7 years of doing this, I'm finally getting to a point where I feel like it's more one-to-one. But it's still like there's still a little bit of that facade you have up, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, on stage you can be a character, you can be a heightened version of yourself, but it is interesting to be like your perception of who you are is not necessarily the right one. So you got to do things to kind of draw that out and make that aligned with the environment, because so many times you'll find it's like it's not actually the case, and it's interesting. It's like it's this constant journey, it never ends.
Yeah, never does. Yes, sir. And that's 7 years in. I mean, that brings me to the next question. Like, where do you see yourself in 10 years from now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I really just want to be able to, like, have my own fan base, that keep growing that. I want to be able to kind of choose what projects I want to work on, Like, I've been lucky to, like I said, I do stand-up is my main thing. I've been involved in some, like, acting stuff, but all the acting stuff that I've done has been because people have asked me about it. So they've seen me do stand-up, and they're like, hey, we'd like you to play this character who's basically you now. Yeah. But it's like, so they either wrote a part for me, or they think I'm very similar to this. So that's the stuff I want to be working on, where it's still me. So I'm reading someone else's words, but it's relatively my character, my persona. And so doing projects like that in general, like across the board, whether it's, some show or whatever it could be. But also in 10 years, like to be at a point where I'm like, hey, I'm selling out theaters, or I'm selling out, like knock on wood arenas, you know?
Yeah, Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, and maybe I think I ultimately have like a successful platform as like maybe a podcast, or I would love to have like a weekly talk show type of thing. Like I just think something like that where I can do stand up, at night, but then I have this other platform during the day where I can, reach the audience as well. And I love the idea of like, that's why like the podcast thing is so appealing, because you build your fans, you have cross pollination, because you have people who've heard your podcast, now they come see you live. And that's what all these big guys are doing. Like Segura, Burt Kreischer, Joe Rogan, like all these huge people, they all have these insanely successful podcasts. And most of the time, they started those podcasts when they were also early in their careers. Like
Yeah.
Joe Rogan started with like a tape recorder in his house, and now he's got the biggest podcast in the world.
Yeah.
So it's kind of wild to think like you can lay the ground roots now because it will pay off. And like we talked about, just growing that base, these engaged fans. So it is a journey. It's not like there's no shortcut, you know?
Yeah,
It's
not
just,
at all.
It takes forever.
Shortcut
but-
is doing the work, doing the
Yeah.
hard work. Yeah.
And you should, like, I'm enjoying the journey. Like it
Yeah.
is, it's gotten to a point now where like I'm doing 8 to 10 to 15 shows a week, and like most of them are very good shows. I'm very lucky because I've worked very hard to do that. But it's like this week I'm at the Laugh Factory at like 3 days. I'm at Zany's 5 days. Like it's crazy. Like it's all cool stuff. Like
I love that perspective. Most
Yeah.
people think, oh, he's working too hard, but that's
no,
your mind.
I mean,
you love it. You
gotta
want more.
like think about like I'm on these stages that like the Laugh Factory is like the world famous stage.
Yeah.
Zany's is the oldest club, like one of the oldest clubs in the country. Like you got to think about like this is history. You're in a place that people are dying to get on that stage.
Yeah.
Dying to get on. So you have to constantly check yourself because you don't want to take this shit for granted either.
Right.
You know, so many people get to a point where you get disconnected and you're like, oh yeah, it's whatever. But it's like, no man, like this is a cool thing
Yeah.
we do. It's very cool to be able to go on that stage and just talk, get paid for jokes. you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Literally.
I remind myself that like once a week. I'm like, I sometimes I pinch myself. I'm like, I'm being paid this much to tell a dick joke. Like that's wild.
Yeah.
Like,
Do what you
that's-
love.
That's amazing. That's like this is what else could I
Right.
want in my life? It's incredible.
Yeah, that's huge. That's a lot of respect. And that's people don't realize the work that actually does go into it. But that leads me to my next two questions for you. Is the first thing is what is your like process? Do you have like a routine or a process for sitting down and writing a joke, an entire session?
Yeah.
What's your process for that?
Yeah, it's kind of that's evolved a little bit. I think lately I think the best jokes come from like for me it's like experience and inspiration. So if I'm walking around in the world, something happens that's funny or I think could be funny, I'll make a quick note in my phone like this happened or like I'll write down what I think is the funny part. But that's like the first step. And then maybe a few days later, I might go back to that and like flush it out a little bit. So I write a little bit more. I kind of like we'll try to add some stuff to it. And then the next step is like taking it on stage. So then I'll go on stage and I'll kind of riff on it. So I'll be like, hey, this thing happened, but I'll have it kind of constructed in my mind at least, or at least I'll know the funny part. And as I've gotten better at stand-up, I'm able to kind of take just the premise or the note and then kind of like flush it out on stage. Like we call that writing
Elaborate
on stage.
from
Yeah.
that. Okay, wow.
But when I started, it was like I was writing the whole bit out,
Wow.
like verbatim, the whole thing. And then I'd go on stage and say it exactly how I wrote it. But then I realized like I'm not that rigid when I talk. So like it wasn't authentic to me.
Yeah.
But that's how you have to start because you got to memorize. You don't want to deviate from the script. And now I realize the fun part is deviating from the script.
Yeah.
Because I find the best stuff for me comes when I'm under pressure. So if I go on stage with this half-baked idea and I have to, we call it finding the funny part, like I'm on stage talking and then suddenly I'm like, oh shit, where do I go from here? Because that's all I wrote down. And so now I'm in a pressure situation. But then your body's like fight or flight.
Yeah.
You'll come up with some stuff in the moment. And a lot of times that will be really funny stuff. So
Wow.
that's like
I wondered that.
Yeah,
Like,
I put
if it was,
myself
like,
in those situations.
winging it or something like
And it's half winging it, but it's also like half like expertise. Like
Yeah.
I'm not gonna do that for my whole set. I'm not gonna
Right.
go on and just wing the entire thing because then you're gonna bomb for sure.
But you got bullet points.
You got some bullets. You got some little thread to follow, and then maybe it's like, hey, I'm gonna put this new bit in the middle of my set. I'm gonna try to work on this, but behind and after it, I have stuff I know is gonna work. So it also like lets you find, the maybe the part that gets a laugh. Maybe you weren't expecting that. You're doing the setup and you get a laugh on the setup. You're like, oh, now I can add more here. So you kind of have to refine it then. So then you go back and you refine it and you keep listening, refining it. So I still try to do I try to write every day. I like free write. I call it like morning minutes, like writing like just 10, 15 minutes of just whatever. Just it doesn't necessarily be funny, but it's just like almost like a journal. And then sometimes within that I'll write a bit in that. And then I'll come and take that out and put it back in the notes. So it's all going back to this like file of like just this running list of stuff.
Wow.
But then after a certain point, when I get the bit where I want it, I move it over to another document where I'm like, this is done.
Yeah.
But I also kind of believe no bit is ever fully done. You're discovering new parts, and sometimes things change. Like, I had like stuff where I was in a relationship. I had all these relationship jokes, and I had all these single jokes. Like you have to kind of evolve as a person and be authentic to who you are. So that's why I don't throw anything away. I just like shelve it sometimes because I'm like, I can't figure this out right now. Maybe in 6 months I'll come back to it. So it's this constant cataloging process. It's honestly, if you look at my phone and my like Google Docs, it looks insane. But it's like I have a weird system.
It works for you.
It works for me. Yeah. So that's kind of like the process is just constantly trying and failing, because if you don't want to ever get too comfortable on stage.
Right.
If you're out there, like obviously I'm having good sets, but I want to also be uncomfortable. I want to be in a moment where I'm like, oh shit, like that didn't work. Now I got to go work harder. Like I go make that work. So, and if you're not doing that, you're not improving as a comedian. You're not taking risks. So you got to be constantly kind of never be truly comfortable, because if you are, then you're not really pushing yourself.
Yeah, you're not growing. You can't grow in your comfort zone.
Absolutely not. No.
You rely a lot on your intuition as well, which brings me to the next thing. Like, you know, a lot of people, I feel like in our business and really in life and anything, can get kind of burnt out. When you're 100% in it, doing it and grinding and working as hard as you do for as long as you have, you know, sometimes people can get burnt out, or they can cloud their vision or not see that. Do you have, like in our business, we have mind, body, spirit. For example, you know, we wake up early, we go to the gym, we read, you know, develop our spiritual side of everything. And then obviously it's right into business. So for you, do you have a morning routine that helps you clear your mind, that helps you throughout that process? And what is that for you?
Yeah, the self-care, right? It's like, it's now become very kind of like cliche, but it is important when you're doing something like this, where you're on like 7 days or 6 days a week, because the recovery phase is also where you grow and develop too. You need to, especially for something creative like comedy, you know, pre-pandemic, I felt like I was so executional. I was going to work, you know, this 9-to-5 job. I was working like 40, 50 hours a week. And then I would come home and I'd eat, and then I'd be out at mics and shows. And I realized, I'm like, this is great. I feel like I'm doing a lot, like I'm executing, but I'm not able to develop as much as I want. I'm not able to like think about the jokes, synthesize the set, reflect. And for comedy, like you have to do that. You need to take time away from the stage to work and write. So if you're just executing, you're not really growing your material, not really growing what you can do, because you simply don't have the time to even reflect and process it. You know, you do, like I'll do 10 shows, 15 shows a week. It takes me sometimes a day after all that to be like, what happened on that show? Like, you got to really, because you're so compartmentalizing too. You're like, one show, you know, yesterday I did 3 sets. 2 of the sets were in the suburbs at the Improv in Schaumburg, which is an older kind of crowd, very different than I did the Late Show at the Laugh Factory, which is called the Nasty Show. So it's all dirty material. It's like completely younger crowd, people on like all sorts of drugs in the crowd, like wild shit, completely different than these 2 earlier sets I did. So like, now today I can decompress and unpack that and be like, okay, what material did I do here? Why did that work? And what can be tweaked? And so I almost like pulled from like a 20, 30 minutes of material for that whole night, but you have to kind of like take that time away. And so for the morning, what I do is like, it's kind of important to situate yourself, follow up routine. Like I usually get up around like the same time every day, regardless if I have what I have that day. I try to keep that consistent. I think getting up at the same time is important. And then the first thing I do is I usually get coffee. I like to go to a specific spot. I like just getting out of the house, you know, walking outside, getting some fresh air, doing that, kind of I used to get up and immediately, I still kind of check my email, but I don't necessarily immediately respond. I'll kind of check, kind of get a sense of what my day's looking like and what my like workload. But I try to go get the thing first so I can be like, okay, I've gotten my coffee, I'm situated. Then I come back, I eat a little bit, then I open up the laptop and start like cranking away on stuff. But
start focusing.
Yeah, start focusing. But it is important to kind of have that, even that 15 minutes in the morning, just that getting up and doing it. Like that's so centering, because you're like, oh, it's nice. And then it kind of situates, I come back, get the emails going. And then about an hour after that, I'll go work out. So, you know, whether it's lifting or running or whatever it is. So I've finished like that morning stuff by like 1 or 2 p.m. I'm done with the gym and I'm done kind of with the email workload. So then after the afternoon onward, it's all like, now we're here to focus on the comedy that's happening either tonight / etc. So I have this nice way of doing it, and I don't feel like I've missed on the self-care at all, because I've taken care of myself. You know, I've worked out, I've gotten ready, and now I'm kind of able to focus and hone in on that. So it's like, it's kind of an extended morning routine, but it goes from like this moment I wake up to about the afternoon, I'd say.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest thing is the gym. Like people like, oh, you know, you don't need to go to the gym or da-da-da-da-da. It's like,
no, it's huge.
You're a human, you have a heart, you need to exercise. And like you mentioned earlier, it correlates physically into mentally. The best way to change your mental is to immediately change your physical. And then we're almost done, but I wanted to touch on real quick, what are some things that you cry about? You know, what are some things that, you know, maybe times in your career or just some things that you've experienced that have been almost like detrimental? Like, how am I going to get over this? And then what are some things that you sing about? You know what I mean? amazing times or just small things, big things in your career and life that really impacted everything about you right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's so many in comedy. There's so many things to cry about because you're like I think I was talking earlier before we started recording. It feels very inconsistent at times. Especially like early on in your career, you go on stage maybe at an open mic, you have an incredible set, and then like the same night, even maybe the next day, you go and do the same jokes in a different room and you get nothing.
Right.
And you're like, wait, I was just validated an hour ago. I think I'm funny. And now this crowd and my peers are telling me I suck.
Yeah.
Within minutes. So like you went from this high to this low, and there's like thousands of those moments all the time. I mean, I can recount so many. So you just have to get better at navigating and understanding like that's part of this process. And like I said, as you get more and more further in your career, it starts to become the spectrum starts to slide the other way where it's like more consistent, better shows, less bad ones.
Okay.
But it is about mentally being comfortable, like knowing that. Be like, yeah, well, it's also like context. Like this is an open mic. It's supposed to be kind of all over the place. And
right.
I don't know what happened. Maybe the audience is sick of it's 20 people have gone up before me. That's fatigue for the crowd, So I also understand what this is for. It's an open mic. It's a practice. I'm just here to try some stuff. There's no stakes here. So letting yourself kind of frame things in a way that don't make excuses, but framing is important to be like, maybe it is on me, but at the same time, I can understand that
not beating yourself up.
Yeah, not beating yourself up. And there's like so many moments where like I haven't gotten something, or I think I'm like, I submit to something and I don't get it. And there's moments where you're like, you get really down and you're like, oh, why did that person get it? Like I'm better than them or I'm funnier than them. And then you have to realize like, oh wait, why am I competing with these other people? Like, I should compete with myself.
Right.
Am I better than I was yesterday? Like, yeah. So then that's it. That's all that I care about.
Wow.
And I was always kind of good about not caring what other people think, but really being able to now, especially with social media, it's hard because you're seeing what other people are doing, right? And you're like, oh shit, but you can't get wrapped up in that. You shouldn't be like, well, I should be doing that. No, you're doing what you're doing.
Comparison is a thief of joy. Yes, sir.
And we can't be out here like looking at, I mean, get inspired by people, but don't let that inspiration go kind of toxic where you're like, well, I should be doing that. It's like, you can do that, but maybe there's another thing that you can do that maybe they can't do.
Yeah.
So kind of find your own lane, create it, and stay in it, and take these risks and take these creative outlets, but don't get bogged down in like what other people are doing, and don't get bogged down in this like hard on yourself, because you realize these are all things that you're developing, you're growing, and it's kind of amazing because you look at your career like, oh, no one else has had this career that I've had. And so you start to look at it as an individual, and you kind of get power in that because you're like, oh, this is kind of cool. Like I did that. So I think, I mean, there's thousands of bombs that I cry about all the time. I mean, during the pandemic, I'll give one specific example. It's probably I like I said, my career last few years has been going well. So I haven't like truly, we call bombing in comedy means you just get no reaction from the crowd. You're eating it or whatever. And it's your self-esteem tanks because you're like getting nothing from the crowd. But I haven't, when we say bomb, like I haven't truly bombed where the whole set has gotten silent in a long time. So I hadn't felt that kind of deep feeling. And then I did a show, like it was still in the pandemic. It was an outdoor show, which comedy does not work outside.
Outside, yeah.
There's nowhere to keep the laughs in. So I didn't know this. This is my first like show back. And I'm doing this like really terrible restaurant. It's like a patio. And the stage was a picnic table.
Wow.
And so this is a very DIY setup. Yeah. So there's one speaker. It's a huge space. There's about 30 people on this patio, but the first person is about like 20 feet from the stage, and it's tables. It's not seats like rows.
Yeah.
So you're kind of spread out. You're dealing with a scattered crowd outside. They can't really hear well. There's a lot of distractions. There's a main road behind you. So you're doing your stuff and it's pretty quiet. Like for comics before me, doing pretty bad, but like still getting some laughter here and there. So I'm like, okay, I'm kind of like, all right, it's going to be bad, but it's not going to be like the worst thing. I go on stage, and I hadn't been on stage in a while, and it was like pandemic, kind of getting back into it. But I was like, oh, I'll like riff and do some stuff. But I hadn't, it's like like exercise.
Yeah.
You being out the gym for 2 weeks, it's a little tough when you come back,
Yeah.
It's a little hard. So I came in, and I was kind of cocky about it. And I came in, I was like, I got this. I'm fine. And first thing I said, like, I tried to riff something, it just wasn't smooth and it wasn't good, and I was like, oh, let me go into material. So I kind of pushed that to the side, tried to go into material, and just it wasn't connecting with any of the material. And then I just was supposed to do like 15 minutes or so, or like 20 minutes. After like 6 minutes, I was like, I don't want to be here anymore.
Yeah.
Like I have felt this deep deep sadness and also deep. I was terrified. I was like, so I just brought up. It was a show where you bring up the next comedian. Like, there's no host, and so I just was like, all right, guys, you ready to keep this going? Here's your next comedian. I just brought up the next comedian, and I got the hell out. I was so. Yeah. It was such a bomb where I almost my body was like, get out.
Yeah, leave.
And I hadn't felt that deep kind of like that feeling of anxiety, and it was just weird. And it was like, it took me a couple days to kind of get over it because I was like, oh, I forgot how to deal with that.
Yeah.
You know, I forgot. And I realized, I was like, well, first of all, always prepare. Never be too cocky. Never think you're good enough. Or it's like you would never go into the gym and just be like, oh, I can lift like 4 plates just without any
drop it on your neck.
And then you just kill yourself. You're like, well, I did it once. You know?
Yeah.
So that was pretty bad. And then I kind of like, I try to follow some routine before I go on stage now. Like I try to like think about what I'm going to say, kind of think about the set, like observe certain things. And
what about your self-talk? Self-talk's a huge thing. A lot of people, if they do go to the gym or they do something like that, they like, I hate this. This sucks. You know, like what is your self-talk and how did that keep you going?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like I listen to some like motivational stuff, like, you know, here and there. I used to listen to it way more often. I used to start my day with it.
Yeah.
Like every day, like a YouTube video on motivation, just like while I was getting ready, just in the background. And then kind of like got to a point where I had memorized it. So like I knew what they were going to say. So I kind of repeated that to myself.
Okay.
And that was kind of a big self-talk thing. And now it's like I kind of try to center myself. Like I take a few breaths before I go on. And now I don't get the, you know, when you go on stage for the first time, your heart rate kind of rises, then it kind of comes down. So that's why that breathing exercises help. But I don't really get that anymore. Like there's not this nervousness as much as there used to. Sometimes there is if it's like it's an audition or something, a bigger show. But for the most part, you know, I'm doing it so long that I've learned to kind of manage that. And so I know as soon as I get that first laugh, I'll be settled. But to the audience, there's no change.
Yeah.
It looks the same. So the breathing is more so than the self-talk at this point, I think, for me, just to kind of keep level.
Gives you control over something.
Yeah, it gives you control. And also, you know, this is a physical thing I'm doing. Like I'm speaking, I'm doing stuff. So it's like you do want to be kind of clear. And like I try to do some like, you know, like talking exercises, trying to get my face loose, you know, get my vocal cords kind of warmed up. I'll be screaming in the car before the show. I'll kind of like yell a little bit, just get my range down, because sometimes I'll go really high in a set or a joke and come down. So just kind of warming up literally physically and mentally. But
it's crazy what goes into it. Tonality, body language, just all sorts of, and that's insane. What about, so a couple more questions and then obviously we'll be done. But the next thing is like, what would you say are some of your strengths, or you can even say your biggest 1 to 3 strengths?
Oh, you said the praise or the things I like sing about. Yeah, I say strengths, and we can go into that too. Like for me, I think it always was confidence. Like even though when I was bad, I mean, people will talk about like a year in, like there's a thing about, especially in stand up, it's like taking control of the room and commanding the stage. And you go on stage, you see someone on stage who's like, oh, that person looks like they know what they're doing. They're kind of owning the room right now.
Yeah.
And it's like you know it when you see it. I can't really describe it.
Energy.
You immediately know what it is when you see it. So I always kind of had some of that. And I think just being able to like deliver, you realize so much of stand-up and comedy is delivery.
Yeah.
And if you can deliver something confidently, even if it's not the best thing in the world, if you do it with confidence, people will buy it.
Yeah.
I mean,
how
it's like,
you say it.
Yeah, it's how you say it. It's like with sales, same thing. If you're confident. If it's like with talking to, say you approach someone at a bar and you're confident, you might get a number, you know?
Yeah.
Like if you come in underconfident, kind of like averting eye contact and whatever, they're like, I don't, no.
Yes.
But some people, confidence is attractive.
Yeah.
Across the board, whether it's like sexually, physically, whatever it is, it's just attractive to people.
1,000%, yes, sir.
So that's one thing I think I've always had. And then the next thing is just like consistency, you know, like putting in the work, showing up. I mean, I think I learned this from like my running days. It's like, if you're doing this every day, you're gonna get better at it.
Yeah.
It may take a while. It's not gonna happen overnight. But if you just keep at it, you're gonna feel better because you're like, I did something. So it's like these micro goals, mini accomplishments, and then you zoom out and you're like, oh, I've done some shit. Now I can run a marathon now. It's like I ran for a year. Now I can run. I have an accomplishment, a tangible accomplishment tied to this work I've done.
Yeah.
So I think the consistency is another thing. And then like, I think also just like being able to accept kind of feedback and be a little bit like, this is where it gets confusing sometimes, because you have to be confident, but you also can't be like cocky.
Yeah. 51-49. That's what we talk about. 51% confidence and then 49%, or the other way, 51 humility, 49 confidence.
That's the right word. Because if you, especially in comedy, like so early on, I was so tied to like certain jokes that I'm like, it's okay to, like I said, I don't throw anything away. I might shelve it.
Yeah.
But also being comfortable, be like deviating from that. Be like,
Yeah.
well, I thought that was funny, but turns out it's not. And being okay, being like, that wasn't good. Like, be better. And I can be better. I know I'll come with something. It may take a little bit. It might take a little work, but not giving up on it, but also being okay with like tossing it to the side for a little bit. Because if you try to hold on to something and just run it into the ground, it's not going to go well. The audience is going to hate it. You're going to hate yourself because it's going to keep getting worse probably before it gets better. So being able to kind of have the humility to step aside from your own work. And it's hard in comedy because it's like you.
Yeah.
So you feel very attached to it. You're like, this is what I think is funny, and people are shitting on what I think is funny now. Now it's a personal attack.
Right.
You know? So
but you don't want to be right. You want to get paid. You know? You want to make people laugh.
So you have to realize this is a job. We're entertainers, you know. Yes, I have a voice. Yes, I have a point of view, but I'm also here to do a job. So understand that and be comfortable with that. And so that is one thing I think people would, the same thing, people would praise me for those things too. And, you know, career-wise, like a few bigger things, like just content-wise, I feel like I have a lot of cool shit happening this year. Like, I have a dry bar comedy special coming out next week, that's like Netflix, but for clean comedy.
Oh, wow.
So I happened to get that and then did it in April. And so now it's like a 30-minute completely clean comedy special, meaning no swearing. So that's like a huge 7 million subscribers on YouTube.
Wow.
Like, they're pretty big. So once that comes out, thank you. I appreciate that. And then I'm recording a special on my own next month at the House of Blues. So that's going to be like, obviously not clean. That'll be a little more fun. But it's just nice to be like, oh, I have this clean set and I have this other, I'm versatile, you know, it's nice to be like, I have these other things that I can do. It's not just like, he's a dirty comedian, he's a clean comedian. It's like, he's a comedian. Yeah. So I think that's something that I think I'm happy about, that I have that versatility.
The biggest thing I gotta say, man, just from what I've seen from you, man, is the first thing is like I'm genuinely just insanely impressed with your mindset, with your ability to just, you're almost like walking on a thin line of like you're not beating yourself up, but you're also not too high on your pedestal. You know, a lot of people, there's so many areas you can get mixed up in.
Yeah.
And everything you said, like you were able to kind of like almost coach yourself and learn through failure, and you were very you have a high intuition, if I were to put it into words, but no, I'm genuinely very impressed with your mindset. You know what I mean? Because everything you're describing is the same thing that I've learned from the mentors in this business and coming up in the business, you know, just obviously in a different way. And then the last thing I would say is there one specific night that get clicked for you? One specific time that it clicked? Like for me, I remember I was sitting in somebody's house, probably my 100th presentation of sales, and I felt it through my body, like a weird feeling, and it clicked for me. Is there a point in time where it clicked for you specifically?
Yeah. I think we had like I said, we produced our own shows, and I think one of the things that was validating and kind of like was cool is that I think like it was like 3 months into comedy, 4 months into comedy, we did this big show where we invited like all of our family and friends, and we had like 200 people come to an office building in Chicago. We did the show in like this big room that overlooked like Wacker Drive. It was like incredible setup, and it was like highly illegal. I don't know how we pulled this off, but it was cool because of that. It was like kind of it was a nicer venue for comedy, but it was like underground comedy. Like it was like it was BYOB, kind of like very cool. So it was almost like a night out plus comedy. And we filled this room with like we were insanely, so many people had bought tickets, and we were kind of blown away. And I was hosting it because it was like I was like the other people I worked with, I was the more senior comedian by like 2 weeks. So they're like, you got to host. So like just being able to walk up, and I still have like someone made like a GoPro video, and so they kind of like followed me on walking up the stage, and like it was just really cool to like turn around that moment and be like, oh, like I'm a comedian now. Like these people came to see me and other friends of mine, and it was very cool to be like this is it. This is what we're doing. And 200 people at that point in my life was insane. I mean, I perform for like, it depends on a given night, but 200 is a big crowd. That's a lot of people. So it is very cool to be like that new into my career, but to be able to do that, get that opportunity, but then realize like, oh, I created this opportunity. So that means if I did that now, imagine in 10 years what I can do. If I can create this buzz now.
That's huge that you see that.
Yeah, so it was very cool, and I think that was a moment I was like, yes, this is... Wow. And it's going back to what you said earlier, and I appreciate what you said. That was very nice of you. self-awareness.
Yeah.
That's what it is. In comedy, the best comedians are self-aware comedians. And I think in life, too. I apply these principles all over. But if you're not able to that's what we talk about, humility and being able to understand, like, step away sometimes from your own work and being able to be humble. But being self-aware will give you so much more perspective.
That's huge.
And it's this balance, though, of being like, kill the 24 hours that you have in front of you, but also step away at the end and reflect. That reflection time is so important, because otherwise you're just going to be executing and then not being able to kind of build and develop.
Wow. And we're going to end on this. The last thing I got to ask, and we'll end on this, and then you can tell them where they can find you, where they can follow you. And I love laughing. Laughter is the cure for every medicine and anything at all. So if you guys are out there and you're watching this and you want a good laughter, we're going to tell you where to find them here. So make sure you stay tuned. But the last thing I wanted to ask you is, one, what kept you going through the hardest times in your career? What kept you going through that? And then I forgot what the second thing I was going to ask you, but that was the main thing I wanted to ask you. So I'll remember if you want to touch on from that.
I think for me, like, the pandemic was tough because it's like I felt like I was in this really upward swing of my career, and like that was probably a tough time just because I was getting all these things and I lost like 6 months of bookings.
Wow.
In like a day because everything shut down. So they all canceled.
Yeah.
And so just that loss was tough to deal with. I mean, it was just the overall period was probably the hardest period, but what kind of kept me going was like it was a nice reset because I could be like, oh, like I've been executing so much. Now it's like I have to reflect. I have no choice.
Perfect
and
time.
I was able to kind of still create. I was like, okay, let me now. I've been neglecting getting on Twitter. I've been neglecting creating TikTok. Now let me get on these other platforms and flush those out because I have to. I have no excuse. So I think always creating has kept me going. Just always doing something that's creative because even if it's not stand-up, it still kind of sparks that muscle a little bit. And it also is something that you can take pride in because you're like, it's fun. Even if it's not great. I made that. It's kind of cool. So that always doing a little bit, even like not a lot. Like I obviously took some time off and I kind of chilled for a little bit, but it was nice to be able to always have this little creative outlet. And I think that was something that I would say is like, that's the one thing that got me through the hardest times is just always making something, always doing something a little bit. But that pandemic was rough. That specific time was like, that was horrible. It was like, what is happening? What's going on with my career? What's going to happen? But it actually helped my career.
Yeah.
Because after I came out, I was still doing shows here and there, but doing a lot of like Zoom comedy, doing a lot of stuff on like that. But it leveled me up in a way. I kind of jumped a couple of years because all these clubs opened at half capacity. So they're like, oh, we can't afford to fly in someone from like a Netflix like headliner from LA. But you're a local guy who has the time that we know is a strong comic. Do you want a headline now?
Yeah.
So that kind of pushed me into a headliner step.
And initially it didn't look like it was going to. Initially, it looked like a bad thing, But
and then again, you put yourself out there and you ask, and you're like, I could do it. And then you do it, and then now you're like, oh shit, I look back like I headline now. Yeah. So it's like it kind of was like it was good, and it stepped into it, and so that's what you have to understand that these negative moments could lead to something really cool.
Yeah.
And now it's like it's been a blessing in a way.
Yeah. Wow. Because that's the biggest thing. The second thing, and that I did want to ask you too, but that I noticed from you is that you're in love with the process. That you fell in love with the process. That's the biggest thing we try to teach here, and it's hard because your process is phone calls. Your process is getting rejected. Your process is saying no's all day. So it's kind of hard to fall in love with the monotonous process. Mm-hmm. But that's all you talk about. You don't talk about millions of dollars or billions of dollars. Obviously, you're going to get to that point because that's a byproduct of just the work you're putting in, but you're in love with the process. So that's the biggest thing I wanted to point out. And then we'll end on this. The last thing is if you could give advice to somebody maybe starting out in comedy or just in life and in anything, young person, looking back to where you were when you started, if you could give advice to them, what would be your biggest piece of advice that you could give to them?
I think it's like an improv thing, but it's like follow the fear is the big improv principle. So if you want to do something but you're hesitant to do it, or you don't, you're scared, whatever it is, take the first step towards that goal, and it can be as simple as like for comedy, if you want to get into stand up, like write a joke, try to write something down,
start doing something.
Or go watch an open mic. Don't perform, go watch. Even that step
Yeah.
is a step, right? If you're not moving forward, you're moving backward, I think.
Right.
So
Yep.
I think if you're doing a little bit towards that goal, and then and I think you have to break it down like that, because if you try to think like I want to be on Netflix, like you haven't done comedy ever, you're like I want to be on Netflix, like that's great to have that vision and mindset, but how do you get there? You got to look at the process, and if you're not looking at the process and like what you can do and following that fear, like, well, my first step is I got to get on stage, right? But before I get on stage, maybe I should go watch what the stage looks like. And so it goes, you realize there's so many little like minor points that are under this bigger goal. So following that fear for that first step will take you there, and it'll start to feel good because you're like, oh, I did that. I accomplished this little thing. Versus like, I'm not on Netflix yet. I hate myself.
That's huge.
So I would say that's my biggest piece of advice is just follow that fear, take the first little micro step.
That's huge, man. Anybody that just heard that is blessed. That's huge. That's a mindset that's hard to come by, and for you to have that mindset so young. I was blessed and lucky enough that I was taught by other people that mindset, and you know, you learn that the hard way, and that's just very impressive. Now, where can everybody find you? Where can they follow you? Where can they see you? Come maybe see your shows, buy some tickets. Where can they find you?
That'd be huge, man. I'm on all social media at Vik Pandya. That's VIK Pandya, just my name. So you can Google me. You can find me on Instagram. That's all my shows. And then I'm based in Chicago, but I'm touring all over the place. But if you're in Chicago, I work all the clubs here. So I got a big show coming up. I'm recording a special at the House of Blues September 15th.
Okay.
2 shows. And then I'm headlining Zanies in Old Town October 23rd. So those are 2 big local shows you can come and support. So please check it out. You know, you can check that out on my Instagram at Vik Pandya. All the details on there.
Okay, sweet, man. We appreciate you hopping on. I gotta say, the biggest thing for me, man, is I learned a lot. Even just listening to you, it's so valuable. How much time, you know, that's the biggest thing about podcasts and everything in general is like I'm over here learning so much, and the mindset that you have. And even though you're 7 years, you know, into this, 100% committed, 7 years into this. And you have so much, like, I just can't imagine where you're going to be 5-10 years from now.
Thanks,
man. It's going to be insane.
That.
But your mindset right now is just so impressive. Share it. If you guys find value in this, which you should, please share the podcast, refer it to your friends, check it out. Like-minded individuals. This is the mindset that everybody should have. If you don't, you're probably not going to be where you want to be. We all got dreams and goals. Make sure you chase them. And I appreciate you having on, man. It was a pleasure. Thank you.